On a cold December morning in 1903, a fragile machine sat on a wooden rail in the sand. It was made from wood, muslin, wire, and an almost unreasonable amount of patience, with chain-driven propellers waiting to turn. The visible problem was getting it into the air, but the real danger came after the ground fell away. People had floated in balloons, launched gliders from hills, and dreamed of engines strong enough to pull a flying vehicle upward. But the sky was not a road. It rolled, shoved, lifted, dropped, and punished anyone who entered it without a way to correct the craft as it moved. That was the Wright brothers' great insight. Powered flight would not begin with power alone. It would begin with control. Wilbur and Orville Wright learned that lesson in a bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio, where balance was never still. A bicycle stays upright because the rider makes constant small corrections, and the Wrights began to see flying the same way. Not as something perfectly steady in the air, but as a moving balance a pilot could correct. Years before Kitty Hawk, their father brought home a small, rubber band-powered helicopter toy. It rose toward the ceiling, broke quickly, and left the boys with a dangerous thought. Flight could be touched with ordinary hands. As young men, the brothers worked as printers, building presses and handling equipment that either worked cleanly or revealed every flaw. Then came bicycles, and the Wright Cycle Company taught them lightness, strength, chains, wheels, friction, repair, and balance under a rider's weight. A bicycle frame had to be strong without being heavy, and a wheel had to run true, or the rider felt the mistake immediately. That kind of work trains a person to respect small errors. A loose chain, a bent rim, or a frame built slightly out of line could turn motion into trouble. The Wrights were not approaching flight as distant dreamers. They were approaching it as mechanics who knew that an invention only becomes useful when a person can trust it under pressure. This mattered because early flight was full of beautiful dreams and broken machines. Otto Lilienthal made repeated glider flights in Germany before dying after a crash in 1896. Samuel Langley built powered models and pursued engines, while Octave Chanute gathered earlier aviation research and shared it widely with experimenters. In 1899, Wilbur wrote to the Smithsonian for aeronautical material. They read, studied earlier attempts, watched the weather, and began separating flight into pieces. An airplane needed wings to lift, a motor to drive, and a pilot's control to keep it alive. Those parts were connected, but they were not the same problem. A stronger engine could not fix a wing that would not lift, and a better wing could not save a pilot who had no way to recover from a turn. The brothers' discipline was in refusing to let one impressive answer pretend to solve everything. Many inventors chased the motor, but the Wrights kept returning to the pilot. They watched birds bend the air with tiny adjustments. Those wings did not simply stay flat and hope for the best. Wing surfaces shifted, twisted, rolled, and restored balance in motion. The brothers tested that idea in Dayton with a small biplane kite only about 5 feet across. By twisting the wingtips, they could make one side rise while the other side fell. This twisting became wing warping, a cable-driven way to roll the craft left or right. In 1900, they carried their first full-size glider to the North Carolina coast. Kitty Hawk gave them steady wind, open sand, privacy, and landings soft enough to make failure slightly less theatrical. The first glider taught them, but the 1901 glider humbled them. It flew, but it lifted poorly, handled unevenly, and made earlier numbers seem unreliable. They could have blamed the weather, the dunes, or bad luck. Instead, they went home and questioned the data. In the back of their Dayton shop, they built a small wind tunnel with homemade measuring instruments. The work was not glamorous. A tunnel, a fan, balances, tiny wing shapes, and two men trying to make the invisible behave long enough to be measured. They measured wing shapes until invisible air became numbers they could use. That was one of the quietest turning points in aviation history. Before the Flyer crossed the sand, two bicycle makers made the wind answer questions. In 1902, the Wrights returned to the dunes with a better glider, then kept refining it flight by flight. By the end, it had improved wings, a forward elevator for pitch, wing warping for roll, and a movable vertical tail to help manage yaw. Pitch means the nose goes up or down. Roll means one wing rises while the other falls. Yaw means the nose swings left or right. Together, those three motions made the sky into a space a pilot could actually manage. The 1902 glider finally gave the brothers what they had been chasing. It did not merely lift, it responded. They made hundreds of gliding flights, perhaps close to 1,000, learning with their bodies as much as with their notebooks. Each landing brought back more information, and each repair made the machine a little more honest. Only then did they turn fully toward power, with their mechanic Charlie Taylor building a light gasoline engine for the 1903 Flyer. They treated each blade not as a screw pushing through air, but as a wing turning in a circle. Power mattered, but it entered a machine already shaped around control. That order is the whole story hiding in plain sight. On December 14, 1903, Wilbur won a coin toss and made the first attempt. The Flyer rose briefly, stalled, and came down hard enough to need repairs. 3 days later, the wind was cold and strong, and Orville lay on the lower wing at the controls. At 10:35 in the morning, the machine moved down the rail and lifted into the air. It flew for 12 seconds and covered 120 feet, a distance short enough to feel almost absurd, because history occasionally enters the room on very modest legs. But the point was not distance. A powered, heavier-than-air machine had lifted with a pilot aboard, moved forward, and remained under human control. John T. Daniels from the nearby life-saving station triggered the camera, despite never having used one before. They made 3 more flights that day, and the last covered 852 feet in 59 seconds, with Wilbur flying. Then a gust overturned the Flyer and wrecked it in the sand. The airplane had survived just long enough to prove the principle. But proof was not the same as mastery. A first flight could change history, but a practical airplane still had to take off, turn, land, and convince the world it was more than a spectacular accident. Back in Ohio, at Huffman Prairie, the brothers kept working through 1904 and 1905. The 1905 Flyer 3 could bank, turn circles, make figure eights, and stay aloft long enough to make flight feel less like a stunt and more like transportation. By October 1905, Wilbur flew for more than 24 miles in 39 minutes. The Wright brothers did not conquer the sky by overpowering it. They made a machine that could listen to a pilot's hands. Their deeper achievement was not a single leap from the sand. It was a way of thinking. Test the machine, measure the truth, correct the error, and try again. That method did not make flight romantic. It made flight real. After centuries of looking upward, human beings could finally enter the sky with purpose. From hands on handlebars to hands on cables, the Wright brothers turned the airplane from a dream into a controlled act. You are always welcome here. At Illumentary,